Hi, let's now talk a little bit about how you can reuse your code that you have built before on D3. So we are going to explore like 2 or 3 different ways of doing it. Let's start by the easiest one. So here is the chart we made on learning how to do data binding with D3. And let's say we want to reuse that, but with different data. So the easiest way of reusing that, if you are still working in Observable, is that you can just come in here and then create, let's save this one. And let's go to Observable and create a new notebook. Then what we are going to be doing is that we are going to be importing from this. So I'm going to copy this. And then let me start a new notebook in here. Oops, I started that in the wrong place. Sorry, here. So we're using charts, or let's call it importing charts. So when you have that, then basically what you need to do is that you need to say import, and then you say what you're going to be importing from, on Observable at least. And then you should be using everything that it's after the slash Observable. So in this case is the username slash the notebook name. The next thing is that you have to see what is the chart that they're drawing. Usually you're going to see that the chart has a name. So then you can pass this in here, and then you can just say, I want to use chart. And that gives me the actual chart that I can show. So when you do that, then that should give us the chart. But since this one actually uses this update function, whatever you import in there is only going to be using those. So in this case, I want to import the 2 of them, so I can make sure that it's actually going to be redrawing that. And then let's call here update. So now I have the 2 things. Now, the key of this, if you want to use this with a different data set, is that you can also like override the data parameter that we had before. So for that, you can say with, and then you say data as data. And then as you see here, data doesn't exist yet. And basically that's because I haven't defined it. So I just need to say here he's going to be my data. So I can just create a simple data set that says, like, for instance, A it's 1 and B is 1, and run it like that. And then I have a chart that creates like that specific one. So let's say that we have more data. So you can actually have something like this. Then we have 2 data points. And then as you can see, it's starting working. So if you want to get fancier, then let's actually get some real data. So let's use bigger data sets, and then we can import that from here. And then we just need to find like one data set that we want to use. Like for instance, in this case, we could say maybe the cars data set. So since that has a dot, then we have to use it like this. And Vega dataset uses functions for loading that. So now we have these elements, and then we have the dots in here. Now, since in the other one we were using, remember that we were using this max records element, so I can also override that. And then I can say my max n, it's going to be data.length. And then I just need to tell it like I also want to override max n, and then you have like the full chart for that. And if you also want to import the other functionality, then you can also import the view of x attribute and the view of y attribute, and then also display that. So in this case, I think we can do something like this, maybe without the view of, or maybe with it. Let's see. View of x attribute and view of y attribute. And then with that, we will have like all the functionalities that we had on the other one, and then actually use it for like make it completely functional on the new data that we got. Okay, so something else that's important to keep in mind in here is that if you want to use this outside of Observable, so you can always just come in here and say, as long as you put a name to it, you can, like for instance in here, you can right click and say embed code, and that will give you a code that you can reuse. If you were to use this outside, then there is another tool that I recommend you taking a look at that it's called the code embed code generator. And then in there, you just need to put the observables you want to reuse. And then you select what are the elements that you want to use. In this case, is the view of the attributes, this view of the chart, and the update. It's very important that we include the update because we have that animation. Otherwise, it will not show. So, and then you can just copy this code and just putting this into your HTML page. Then you will be able to reuse that. Now, another way of doing this, of reusing that will be, well, just forking the code and then replacing, for instance, the data. That will be a little bit faster, but then you will have a very dense notebook. So in certain cases, like for instance, if you want to show multiple charts, then importing it's a better way. The third way of doing it, and this might be a little bit like the hardest way, or it's kind of reusing some concepts from the past. So my postdoc published like almost 10 years ago this article that I recommend you taking a look at. Just search for towards reusable charts and then take a look at it and try to understand what he's trying to do in there. Basically, he comes up with an option of creating charts that you can call with something like this. And you say, I'm going to load my data, and then I'm going to select a place where I want to draw it, and I'm just going to call chart. And chart, it's being created by something like this. So you just create your chart and you pass whatever attributes you want for that. So it's a very lovely pattern, and then I have it here implemented. So if you search for this notebook of my own, then you can see basically what we are doing in here is that I am creating my chart and saying here is my X attribute, my Y attribute, here is my chart width. That I'm just doing that so I can see that happening with this. And then I'm just going to select the base, which is this div that I created in here, and then pass the data. So assign the data to it and draw it in here. The key for making that work is that you create a function that is your chart, and then that function will have another function inside that is this one, and that's the function that you return in the module. So that is kind of, it takes a while to get used to it, but once you learn it, then it's not that difficult. Then the other things that are inside are all of the constants or the things that you want to be like parameters of the module coming here. I added these elements so you can control like in a detailed way, like the enter, update, and exit. And this is also important because basically what this is doing is that it's only going to be appending, for instance, an SVG if the chart doesn't have an SVG yet. So if it does, then it doesn't create one and just reuse it. And then in the chart function, that is the one that actually does the drawing, that function accesses the selection, which uses the each that gets you to the data. And then from the data, you update the widths and the height. You update the width and the height of the SVG. You update the G drawing, update the domains and ranges of your scales. And this one is just for an animation that we have in here. So this part especially, it's only for observable. And then here we're drawing your x-axis and your y-axis. And finally here is where you're drawing stuff. So the other thing that you have in here are accessors that I think I showed you before that you can use for modifying those parameters. And the cool thing about that is that you can come up with a chart like this with something as easy as this. So basically you just say, I'm going to select this div, and then I'm going to select all of the quantitative attributes of my data that are these, say, 6 elements that you see here. And then you say, I'm going to join divs. So pretty much I'm creating a div for each row. And then I'm calling each so I can actually keep this in memory. And then inside that, I'm selecting that row and I'm appending a span for each column. And the reason why I'm using span is that in HTML, the span doesn't create a break line. So actually it will be creating the columns. And then for each one of those, it will draw it like this. So I know it's a lot to handle. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create an explanation when I go from scratch to this. So if you want to learn that in detail, I recommend you doing it. Just stay for the video, but it might be a little long too. So if that is not that interesting to you, then you can move on for the next video. So let's get started. So for that, basically the first thing, or what we want, is that, of course, we are going to be using D3. So let's load that. And then the other thing is that we also need some data. So let's say that we are going to await for Vega data sets, I think is what it's called, number 2. And then that await is actually going to wait for it to get it. And then after you get that, I want the cars.json, I think it's what's called. And then call a function on that. And then that gives me the data. Okay, so that's just a way of getting data, fancy way of getting data. So the way I want to call my chart, let's start with that, is that I want to be able to say, for instance, let's create a div with D3 create a div, and then return that div. Remember that since that's going to return a selection, this is actually going to return my div. Now that we are here, the way I want to create my chart is that I want to instantiate my chart, something like this. I want it to be my chart. And then I just want to be able to do div dot, so we already have a selection in there. So I just want to say my datum, in this case, is only one data point. So I'm just going to assign that data to the whole div. And then I just want to call chart. So this is the end result. This is what I want. So I don't have my chart. So let's start creating that chart. So this is going to be a function. So as you can see, I'm calling a function. So it should be something like this. And then this function should return something. In this case, we could say, for instance, let's return like an object like this, and then return that. So the problem of doing that is that when I get here, it's going to tell me that you cannot call chart. So actually this chart shouldn't be an object. It should be another function, okay? And that's where things start getting interesting. So this function, when you use D3 call on a selection, basically it's expecting that this is a function. What it's going to do is that it's going to expect that this is a selection. And then if I do, for instance, a console log of the selection, then it's going to show me this div that we have in here. So if I actually take a look in here, that is actually the div that we have in there. So if I get, for instance, div selection node, it's going to show me the element. So this must be a function, so it has to be something like this. So whatever chart is, that is whatever this thing is returning, should be something similar to this. So this is going to be a function that is going to having a selection as a parameter. And then I am going to get to here. And then now I can see the selection in there. So this, in this place, now I can start, for instance, saying that in the selection, I want to append, for instance, another div. And in that div, or maybe like a list item, so it will show something. And then in that list, I say, hola. So if I do that, now I have this. One of the problems is that if every time I rerun this, it's going to be okay, but let's actually separate this in two parts. So I like having this as an update, as a separate update. And this is useful for whenever you're doing animations. So in this case, I have this. I just need to select this. So I'm going to save this div as this. And then I just do D3 select here, so I can have that. And now I have the hola. The problem is that if I keep on running this, then it's going to keep on adding holas. So that it's a problem in there because I actually should be having only one hola. So for that, one of the things you can do is that you could say, instead of appending, and it makes sense because I'm appending this, instead of appending, what you should be doing, it's doing something like, if I want a list item, so I should do a select all of my list items, and then I'm going to do a join with list items. I need to do some data binding and assign at least how many do I want. In this case, let's say that I'm going to have like one element. I'm just going to bind it with the number 1. And then in there, I'm just going to say hola, okay? So by doing that, this is still going to draw it, but it doesn't matter how many times I run this, it will still keep only one, because it's always going to check. The first time is going to append it, but the other times is just going to say, oh, I already have an element, so I'm just going to update it with whatever data I have in here. Now, I shouldn't be drawing in there one. What I want to be drawing is the data. So in Observable, it's very easy just to say here data. And that, in that case, gave me all of this, because like it's creating 406 data elements. So I could do something like this, but I actually want this to be something that I can use outside Observable. So I actually want to get in the chart, I want to get my data. So you can see that I'm selecting the data like this. So if you want to get access to that data, then what you can do is that on this selection, you could do something like this. You could say selection.each, and then on that you can say here comes my data. So when you do something like that, then now everything that it's inside of this will have access to the selection and also to this data that it's actually coming from inside. So there is if you take a look at the documentation for D3 selection, then you can see that that is part of the advanced control of I think he even has it in here, control flow. So for advanced usage, you can use each, that is going to call the function for each data element that you have, and then it's going to pass what is the datum and the index and the group of nodes. And call, it's only called once with the selection as a parameter. Okay, so coming back to where we were, but I think it's, where am I? Here. So since we are saying datum data, then basically I'm passing only one data element that contains all the data, and that's how I'm getting it in here. Okay, so the first thing you will want to do is that usually you want to draw this with SVGs instead of list items. So I can say I'm going to select all of the SVGs, and then inside those SVGs, I don't need to do this data because it's actually coming directly from the data, or if I want to pass it, then I can also do it. And then I'm going to say I'm going to append these as SVGs, and then now I can create these like this. And then let's say that the typical thing that we will do is that and let me copy that just because I'm getting lazy today. So you will create like your margin, something like this. Would have been easier just copying and pasting. So I'm actually going to put that in here. So this is going to be my margin. And then apart from that, I also want to take my SVG. And the normal thing you will do is to append this. And then this thing, you will like to do a transform where you translate this in margin left, comma, margin top. Okay, so remember, this is kind of my G drawing. So usually I will have something like this. And then on that G drawing, I will do like whatever you want to add in there. Like you could add, for instance, circles or elements like that. But for the moment, in that one, let's just append a text and create the text, the hola that we see in there. Now, if you do this, then, and we redraw this, so it actually starts with that. So now you can see that if I inspect this thing, it's actually creating one text. But if I rerun this, then now you can see that it started creating like all of these Gs. And the reason for that is, of course, like the SVG is not getting duplicated because I'm doing the select all, but the G is. So what do we do in there? So an easier, like the first thing that came to mind was like duplicating this behavior, but that starts becoming like cumbersome. Instead of that, what you could do, it's like handle the enter, update, and exit like separately. So remember that you can say in here, these are the things that I'm going to be doing when entering. And basically what I want to do in there is that I want to do enter dot append SVG, and then return that first. And then all of these things that I also want to append, I'm going to do inside there. So the way we could do that, it's something like this. We could say const SVG it is. And then you do your svg.append, and let's put a class on it so we can actually select it later when we come back down here to see it. So we can call that, I like calling that gdrawing or canvas too, but I'm scared of calling it canvas because it can be confusing with canvas. So make sure that you return this element in here. And then just by doing that, instead of doing svg dot append g, what you do is svg dot select g drawing. And then inside that one, for the moment, it's going to run like this. And then every time you rerun, if you take a look at what's happening in here, at least the G drawing, it's not getting duplicated. I'm getting multiple texts because I still have an append in there. So the key for this is that every append that you do that is not with data binding should go in the enter. And then from then on, you should be doing things with selects. So for instance, if I want to draw, let's say, for instance, a scatter plot in here, then I need to create an X scale that is going to be scale linear. And then I'm also going to create a Y scale that is going to be D3 scale linear as well. So, and then remember that for drawing these elements, let's start in here. So if I want to create circles for that, so I can use a D3 select all, and let's say that I want to create, let's call them item. And then I'm going to do data binding on that. So I can actually do it once more like this. Or actually, since the data is already coming on the selection, it will be possible for you just to use a function instead of that. But let's keep it like this for simplicity. So, and then you want to create a circle. That's the mark that I'm doing with an attribute cx that is going to be d.x of the sub. And then you use whatever attribute you're going to use. Acceleration. Okay, so maybe if you want to keep this reusable, then we can say this is going to be my X attribute. And then you pass that in here. So you say this is my X attribute. And then you do the same with this one. That is going to be my Y attribute. And then you use something else. And we are going to make that one customizable in a second. So now we have this. Let me add the one for CY, and let me add another one that is going to be the radius. In this case, let's use a small radius. That's going to be only 2 pixels. And this is going to be CY, and this is going to be my Y. Okay. So far, now I have my scatter plot. My SVG is not drawing very nicely. So one of the things I could do in here is that I can take this SVG and then I can, let's put it in a different one so it doesn't look all messed up. So we can say on the SVG that I'm going to change the attribute view box and say that this is going to be from 0, 0 to I width or width height. Okay. So when you do that, then I'm going to create a local width that is different from the one from Observable and a local height. Excuse me. And then now we have that. And now this thing's looking a little bit better. So I still have garbage because I need to rerun this, as you can see there. And then let's make this one a little bit smaller so it doesn't get that far. Okay, so now it's starting to draw my elements. One of the problems is that my scale, I haven't customized them to the data, so I can do that, and I should do that here. That is where I have my data. So I'm going to say that my domain is going to be the D3 extent of my data with d.d sub x attribute. And then for the width, or instead of the width, sorry, the range, I'm going to go from 0 to the width, which actually, since we are using margins, then I actually should be having in here like I width, that is going to be my width, minus margin left, minus margin right. And do the same with my height. That is going to be height minus margin top minus margin bottom. So with that, I'm going to go in here from this to this. And then for the Y domain, I'm going to do the same, but in this case, it's going to be with the Y attribute. And finally, this should be from my I height to 0. And remember that that's so I can flip that thing over. So now it is actually distributing things more nicely. I can see that. I'm still getting some errors in there, I think. And one of the reasons might be because I need to make sure that I assign that here. So let's put that in here like this. So that way I guarantee that I'm reusing the same element. So even if I change this, for instance, to something smaller, then it's actually, although I didn't create it in there, let me make sure that's actually working. And then if not, we can debug what's happening. So when I inspect this, so I have these elements with all of this, and hopefully, let's see. If I change this, yeah, it seems that now it's working. So I didn't get overclocking in there. So let's say that this is like 600. So the final thing is that I also need the access, and I'm going to stop in there after showing you how to customize. So for creating the access, usually you will do like svg.append. So remember, all the appends should go in here. So we are going to do append in here, and then say this is going to be an attribute with a class of x axis, and then the other one is going to be my y axis. Then I can just say in here that I'm going to take my g and then select the dot x axis, and then call d3 axis bottom of x, and then something like this. This has to be after selecting the g, and the same can be done with y in here and y in here. Okay, so, and of course I have this, and then if I rerun this, I'm still not seeing that. Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to, this is, I select the element and then I do call. So it seems like I'm tired already. So let's do call in here, and then I'm still not seeing that. Let's see if it is actually creating the G's. So I have my viewbox in here, I have the two of them, and I'm passing these ones, but I'm not getting anything inside. So this one should be axis left. I'm selecting the axis in here, x-axis, this is the class, I'm doing dot. Am I missing something? Cool. Still not getting that. Let me take a look at not this one, but where is my example? Let's search for it in here just to see if that is faster, to try to find why that one is failing. I might be missing something in there, so I do have a, but yes, it should be enough. So what could be wrong in here? So I actually, in the enter, I appended another G in here. Oh, so this is the difference. So I appended that directly on the SVG instead of appending that on the G drawing, which is where I want that. So if I rerun that, now I see something better. You can do like the transformation, the typical transformation to do in here. So that will be an attribute transform with a translate of, I think for this one on X, you don't move anything, but on Y, you say I hide, and then you close this, close that, and then now it's on the bottom. So the final thing that you do, because if you can start adding animations and other things, but the key in here is, remember, like anything that is append should go in here in your enter. I actually separated that on the other code so it's easier to understand. But the final thing is, like, say you want to change these attributes. So if you want to do that, then remember this is what we are returning. So if you want to create an accessor for that, you can do something like this. You can say I'm going to create a function, and this function is going to take as a parameter like a whatever thing, and then what I'm going to say is if I don't have any arguments, then what I'm going to do is return the current value of X. But if I do have an argument, then that means that this is something different from undefined. So what I want to do in there is that I assign that in there, and then finally I return chart. The reason why you want to return chart is so that you can chain things in there. I wonder if I can return chart in here as well. That's kind of recursive, but anyhow. So when you have that, then you have an X and a Y. So now I can change this for this. And with that, if you want to show not, let's put a better name for this. Let's call it reusable chart pattern. Although maybe a different one, or like towards reusable charts, I don't know. Let's do it like that for the moment. I'm going to put that in the scratchbook so you can find them, and then if you want to change the X and the X and Y, so you can put that in here. So you say I'm going to use miles per gallon, I think it's the other one, and then of course you have to make sure that you use the right name. There we go. So that changes the attribute. If you also want to show the title, then you can append that in there as well. So that is another way of doing it. A quick recap before finishing. This is the model from Mike Bostock. The whole idea is that you can create a place where you want to draw things. Then the way of calling that is that you instantiate your chart, and then you just select assign data and then call your chart. The reason why that works is that your chart is going to be returning a function, and that function is going to take as a parameter a selection, and then from there you can access the data. Remember that here are going to be all of your parameters. Here are some accessors to change them. If you want anything that is an append, should go in the enter part of your SVG, and then from then on just do selections and modify the values for that.